The moment I crossed the threshold of that ballroom, I heard her say it. She didn't have to raise her voice much. The sentence traveled through the air, heavy with imported flowers, cut through the murmuring guests, and landed straight in my ears as if delivered with surgical precision. Sasha Vance, my brother's picture-perfect fiancée, was leaning toward her bridesmaids, a champagne flute in her hand, flawlessly put together. Nude manicure, engagement ring dazzling enough to compete with the chandeliers. Her head was tilted, her smile just right, and her whisper was loud enough to travel across the room. And I know with the same certainty I know my own name that she did it on purpose. Oh great. The stinky small-town girl is here. Her friends let out little giggles, like a pack of hyenas wrapped in silk and tulle, drenched in expensive perfume, and the blind certainty of people who think the world is a mirror designed to adore them. None of them even bothered to turn around. Sasha didn't look at me when she said it. To her, I was that insignificant. A mere embarrassment who crawled out of some backwater to ruin the aesthetic of her engagement party. Years ago, maybe I would have shrunk. I would have pretended not to hear. I would have searched for a dark corner to disappear into. But that time was long gone. Because what Sasha didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I signed the deed to this hotel 3 years ago. This is the Monarch Hotel. Every chandelier above her head, every piece of silver cutlery she used to bring delicate canapes to her mouth, every inch of Italian marble under those ridiculously expensive heels, it was mine. Those enormous mirrors, that perfect lighting, the acoustics that made her insult travel with such precision, all mine. And before this night was over, that little whisper was going to cost her everything she ever wanted. My name is Chloe Miller. I'm 33 years old, and I grew up in Willow Creek, Pennsylvania, a town so small the biggest traffic jam we ever had was when Old Man Harrison's cows escaped and blocked the main street for 3 hours. The sheriff put out traffic cones, the cows stared him down, and the whole town came out to take pictures. That was our great civic chaos. I left home at 18 and never really looked back. Not because I hated where I came from. I loved Willow Creek, its cracked sidewalks and the bakery that smelled of butter 2 blocks away, but because my family made it crystal clear there was no room for me. I have an older brother, Ethan, the golden boy, the son who could do no wrong, who always knew what to say, how to stand, when to smile. I grew up with everything I did being compared to him, and I always fell short. If I got an A, Ethan got an A+ with honors. If I made the JV softball team, Ethan was already captain of the varsity baseball team. If I came home happy with a drawing taped to the fridge, one of his diplomas was already occupying the prime spot. My mother, Diana, had a special way of looking at me that made me feel like a draft, while Ethan was the finished work, framed and hung in the living room. I remember one afternoon when I was about 12. I brought home a certificate for winning a writing contest. I was so proud, my fingers still stained with cheap pen ink. My mother barely looked up from the stove. She said it was nice, but told me not to get distracted. What mattered were the serious subjects. That same week, Ethan scored 2 goals in a school game, and my mother organized a whole dinner to celebrate. It wasn't that Ethan was mean to me, he was simply used to the spotlight following him. When you're someone's shadow, you learn to move in the margins, to observe everything without being seen. And there, without knowing it, I started training for what was to come. So I left. The morning I departed, there was no drama, no tears, no pleas to stay. I packed what I could into a worn-out suitcase, double-folded my favorite sweatshirt, and put my notebook in the inner pocket. I took a Greyhound bus to the city with nothing but $200, a stubborn refusal to fail, and the echo of my grandmother telling me, "You are no less than anyone, child." Back in Willow Creek, everyone probably imagined I was suffering, trapped in some tiny studio apartment, eating instant ramen, and crying myself to sleep. And truthfully, that was partially true for the first couple of years. I worked clearing tables in a coffee shop, then handing out flyers, then folding clothes at a retail store where no one bothered to learn my name. I slept in a studio apartment with paper-thin walls, listening to my neighbors' fights, a baby crying, and the TV in the apartment downstairs always cranked up. What they didn't know back home over their Sunday dinners was that I got a job as a housekeeper at a boutique hotel, and that job changed everything. The first day I walked through the service entrance, The air was a mix of floor cleaner, fresh coffee, and nerves. They gave me a uniform that was too big, a cart loaded with supplies, and a list of rooms. No one expected anything from me, and that was perfect. I watched, I studied, I learned everything. How the front desk agents talked, how the duty manager solved problems, how a small detail, a fresh flower, a handwritten note, could bring a guest back. I listened to conversations in the hallways, jotted things down in my notebook on breaks. I asked questions when it was safe to ask. I climbed step by step. From cleaning rooms to the front desk, from the front desk to assistant manager, from assistant to full manager. Each promotion was a silent battle. Long hours, strategic smiles, memorized data. I saved every penny, invested carefully, made smart decisions, and took risks when it made sense, not a minute before. While others spent their tips going out, I was building a spreadsheet for my savings and 401k. While my coworkers tried on shoes, I sat in the back of the bus reading about commercial mortgages and occupancy rates. At 33, I run the Birchwood Group, a company that owns 6 boutique hotels along the East Coast. The Monarch is my gem, my pride, my daily reminder that the invisible girl from Willow Creek built something solid, brick by brick. There is something you learn when you build something from nothing. How to keep quiet. You learn to value silence as a weapon. You learn that people underestimate you. And sometimes that's the most useful thing they can do for you. I smile at the men in suits who didn't take me seriously in meetings, let them talk, and then sign contracts they never saw coming. That's why I never told my family. They didn't ask either. To them, I was still the little sister who couldn't measure up to Ethan and his mid-level position at an insurance firm. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast and still have enough left for dessert. I got an invitation to Ethan's engagement party that night. Last minute, of course. An email with a vague subject line and a message from my mother saying it would be nice if I came. The equivalent of an obligatory invite to a neighborhood meeting. It was probably her idea, an invitation born of guilt, so she could tell her friends that the whole family had attended. I almost didn't come. I closed the email, opened it again, left it in the drafts folder in my head, but something pulled me here. Curiosity, maybe, or a stubborn hope that something had changed in all those years. That at least one person might ask, "And you, Chloe, what have you done with your life?" Nothing had changed. I stood at the entrance of my own hotel in dark jeans and my favorite soft leather boots, my hair still faintly smelling of the countryside, because I stopped by Willow Creek on the way, just to remind myself where I started. I stopped the car in front of the old town square. I got out for a minute, breathed in that air of fresh-baked bread and old gasoline. I listened to 2 women gossiping by the pharmacy door. No one recognized me. No one had any reason to. Then I continued on to the Monarch. My outfit that night cost more than everything Sasha was wearing, but you wouldn't notice it at a glance. That's what real money looks like. It doesn't need to shout or hang tags where everyone can see them. I saw my mother, Diana, across the room, reigning over her circle of friends like the mayor of some imaginary township, probably boasting about Ethan's marvelous fiancé and the marvelous future awaiting them. Ethan was next to Sasha, wearing the expression of a man who just won the lottery, not knowing the ticket was counterfeit. He was laughing, nodding, his hand on the small of her back, like the hero of a cheap romantic comedy. Sasha finally looked my way and gave me a smile as sharp as a paper cut. She didn't recognize me as anything more than an inconvenience, a smudge on her perfect night, a discordant note in her carefully rehearsed symphony. I didn't care what she thought, or what they all thought. I learned a long time ago that the best revenge isn't loud, it's patient, silent, and lets people dig their own grave while looking over their shoulder. I smiled back. That calm smile you wear when you know something others don't. I walked to the bar and ordered a drink. The bartender recognized me immediately, but didn't let it show. My staff knew better than to reveal it. Marcus Reed, my general manager, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a minimal nod. Everything was perfect. The service was flowing, the champagne was running, the kitchen was handling the pressure. Perfect for now. Because in about 3 hours, Sasha Vance was going to learn a very important lesson. Never underestimate the small-town girl, especially when she owns the ground you're standing on. The party was exactly what you'd expect from someone like Sasha. Extravagant, overdone, designed to impress people who were already impressed with themselves. There were ice sculptures shaped like swans too thin to be believable. A champagne fountain that seemed excessive even by champagne fountain standards. 3 tiers, lights underneath, bubbles like a golden volcano. And so many flowers that a botanical garden would have been jealous and demanded royalties. A string quartet played pop song covers because nothing says class like pretending you don't recognize the latest hit tune played by violins. My team did an impeccable job. The centerpieces were perfect. The waitstaff service was a silent ballet. Trays came out of the kitchen as if they had GPS. That filled me with pride, even if, internally, I wanted to roll my eyes at every aesthetic decision Sasha had made, from the lace-edged tablecloths to the napkins folded into lotus flowers. I settled into a discreet corner to watch, drink in hand, and then my mother appeared. Diana Miller approached like a woman who just smelled something awful, and was trying to locate the source. Her dress was elegant and sober, but her expression ruined everything. She looked me up and down, pausing at my boots as if they were an etiquette crime, with a palpable disapproval. She said it was nice that I could come, in a tone that meant the exact opposite. The word nice came out strained, as if she had to chew it first. Then she asked why I hadn't worn something more appropriate, mentioning that Sasha's family was very refined. She pronounced refined as if it were vocabulary I should study for a test. Her left eyebrow rose microscopically, the same eyebrow she used to correct my posture when I was a kid. I told her I had come straight from work and hadn't had time to change, which was true. I just didn't mention that work meant running a multi-million-dollar hotel enterprise. I could have told her my jeans were custom-made, and my boots cost more than Sasha's entire hairstyle, but I didn't see the point. My mother sighed, the same way she always sighed with me. That long, resigned sigh, as if I were a permanent disappointment she had learned to tolerate because she had no choice. She told me to at least try to make a good impression on the Vances, that they were important people, and disappeared back into the crowd to continue her social obligations, which mainly consisted of talking badly about those who weren't present with those who were. And there I was. 20 seconds of conversation, and I felt 12 again, failing an invisible rule no one explained, but everyone expected me to know. I took a breath, counted to 5 mentally, and took a small sip of my drink so I wouldn't empty the glass in one gulp. I looked at Sasha across the room, air-kissing guests. That woman kissed more cheeks that night than a politician on the campaign trail, leaning in just enough, laughing a little louder than necessary. Every gesture was calculated, every smile measured for maximum effect, every look shot like a dart at the right person. Her parents, Richard and Brenda Vance, were nearby, preening as if they were exiled royalty. Richard was a big man, broad-shouldered, with a ruddy face and that confidence that comes from real success or from acting very well like you have it. Brenda was thin, polished, perfectly preserved, dripping in jewelry that caught the light with every movement, like tiny private constellations. They looked rich, they acted rich, they moved rich, but something didn't fit, like a beautiful painting hung just slightly crooked. Something in the composition bothered the eye without you knowing exactly what. I couldn't pinpoint it yet, but I knew I would. Then Ethan finally saw me and walked over, adjusting his tie on the way, looking at me the way he did when we were kids, and I was the annoying sister who followed him everywhere with a notebook in her hand. He said he was glad I came, though his tone made it clear he didn't care if I was there or not. The night didn't orbit around my attendance. He asked if I had met Sasha yet, and said she was incredible, that he'd never met anyone so, and he searched for adjectives as if choosing from a glossy catalog: brilliant, sophisticated, special. I replied that I had already seen her, and I kept the rest to myself. That comment about the ice swans was burning on my tongue. Ethan nodded, looking over my shoulder to locate who else he needed to greet, whose hand to shake, which smile to practice. Some things never change. And then he dropped a line that tightened my stomach like a punch from the inside. He mentioned that Mom had given Sasha Grandma's necklace as an engagement gift. Wasn't that generous? He said proudly, adding that Sasha loved it, saying it had a perfect vintage vibe for her. The air left my lungs. That necklace. The antique pendant of tarnished gold and opaque blue stone that my grandmother had promised me before she died. I remember her wrinkled, soft hands calling me into her room when the smell of eucalyptus filled the house. She took my hand and told me it was for me, because I was her dreamer, her fighter, the one who would make her own path, even if she had to hack through the jungle to do it. My mother knew. She was in the room when my grandmother said it, lips tight, and yet she handed it over to Sasha as if it were an available trinket, as if a dying old woman's words were worth nothing. I looked up and saw it. It hung around Sasha's neck as if it belonged there, resting right in the hollow curve between her collarbones, sparkling under the chandeliers while she laughed at something one of her friends said. The DJ cranked the music so loud my teeth vibrated. The bass thudded in my chest, and the lights changed color as if the ballroom were a nightclub disguised as a gala. I excused myself to Ethan, saying I needed the restroom, and left to breathe. I needed walls, silence, a door between me and that damned necklace. In the less lit hallway leading to the restrooms, crossed by waiters coming and going with trays, I walked past Richard Vance. He had his phone glued to his ear, his face tense, etched with stress. The charming expression had vanished instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. He didn't see me. He was too focused on his conversation. I heard him say, in a low but urgent tone, that they needed this wedding to happen, that the Millers had plenty of money to cover their situation. There was a heavy silence as he listened to the person on the other end, and then he added that they just had to hold on until the ceremony. After that, everything would be fixed. That they should trust him. That they were almost there. He hung up and walked back toward the ballroom with his salesman's smile, readjusting it like a mask, smoothing his jacket, straightening his shoulders. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding harder than the DJ's bass. My grandmother's necklace faded into the background, replaced by something more urgent, bigger, more dangerous. The Millers had money? What money? My parents had a decent house, yes, the lawn was cared for, the paint was recent, but I knew for a fact they had a second mortgage because I had been secretly paying it off for the last 4 years. Ethan had a stable job, nothing spectacular, enough for an apartment, a modest car, and vacations on a payment plan. There was no family fortune, no secret fund, no hidden inheritance. So why was Richard so sure that there was? And more importantly, what exactly was their situation that needed to be covered by us? I returned to the ballroom, and spent the next hour watching the Vances like a hawk watching its prey. Every smile, every handshake, every perfectly timed laugh. Now that I knew something was wrong, the cracks were visible everywhere. Richard checked his phone again and again. His jaw tightened every time he read a message. His fingers clenched around his glass. Brenda's jewels were impressive, but she kept nervously touching them, as if she feared they would disappear if she looked away for a second. And Sasha, perfect Sasha, had a hunger in her eyes that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with desperation, with urgency. Her laughs were half a second too loud, her touches too rehearsed. And then I started piecing it together. The Vances thought my family had money. Why? The realization hit me like a punch to the face. For 4 years, I had been anonymously sending my parents money through the Birchwood Group. Every month, a payment arrived to cover the mortgage, utilities, medical bills. When my father had knee surgery, I covered that too. I remember signing that wire transfer from an airport during a layover without thinking twice. I never put my name on it. The deposits came in the name of the group, like a discreet benefactor. I didn't want thanks or questions. I just wanted to help from a distance, without putting myself in the line of judgment or expectations. My parents never knew it was me. And apparently, my mother decided it had to be Ethan. Of course. In her head, her golden boy was secretly taking care of them. The successful, responsible son she always knew he would be. I could imagine her boasting to her friends after church. How generous Ethan was, how much he was investing, how well he was supporting the family. The money I sent, the sacrifices I made, the sleepless nights spent closing numbers. The credit was going to him without him even knowing it. The irony was so thick you could have brought it to the party and ordered it a drink on the rocks. So the Vances investigated. They saw a house with mysteriously covered payments. They heard Diana boasting about her son's investments to anyone who would listen. They saw a family that appeared to have hidden wealth, a source of discreet but constant money, and they targeted Ethan like sharks smelling blood in the water. But there was one enormous problem. That money wasn't Ethan's. There was no family fortune. The Vances were chasing a mirage. And when they discovered the truth, they would leave my family with the wreckage, financial and emotional debris, unless someone stopped them. And for the first time that night, I felt something other than resentment. A chilling fire of responsibility. I looked for Marcus near the service entrance, clipboard in hand, coordinating the catering, giving instructions in a low voice. When he saw me, his professional mask softened into genuine warmth, and he quietly asked if everything was all right, calling me Ms. Miller before I gave him a side eye. He quickly corrected himself and said Chloe, remembering the instruction to go unnoticed. I asked him for a favor. I needed information on the Vances, anything. Records, notes, articles, background checks, anything a good, curious manager could find in less than one night. Marcus didn't ask why. I always appreciated that about him. He was one of those men who understood that sometimes questions complicate what has already been decided. He just nodded and said he would see what he could dig up. I watched him disappear down a side corridor, already dialing numbers on his phone. I went back into the ballroom, trying to act normal, and that's when Sasha found me. She appeared next to me like a ghost in a designer dress, with a smile so sweet it could give you instant cavities. Her perfume surrounded her like a cloud, vanilla, jasmine, something expensive and aggressive. She suggested we talk alone to get to know each other, she said with the intonation people use when they never want to truly know you. She took my arm as if we were lifelong friends and led me toward a corner near the restrooms, where the music noise was slightly muffled and the foot traffic was minimal. As soon as we were out of earshot, her smile evaporated as if it had never been real. She said she knew everything about me, drawing out the word as if it were a poisoned gift. She knew I sent money home every month, playing the good daughter from afar. Then she brought up what confused her. Why would someone who can barely afford her own apartment send money to a family that doesn't even like her? I felt my jaw tighten but kept a neutral face. That poker face I learned in meetings with bankers, while she continued to savor every word as if chewing a costly dessert. She said maybe I was trying to buy love, to prove I was worth something. Pathetic, she called it, looking at me as if evaluating a cheap dress. She leaned in, bringing her glass close to my face, and insisted that Ethan told her everything. That I was always jealous of him. That I couldn't stand not being the favorite. That the family only tolerated me out of pity. And that everyone knew it but me. She smiled again, but this time the smile was a sharp knife without a hint of warmth. She said she was going to marry Ethan, she was going to be part of the family, and honestly, it would be better for everyone if I stayed away. No one will miss you, she finished and called me dead weight. Then she patted my arm as if comforting a spoiled child and walked away, moving her dress as if she were on a runway. I stayed still, leaning against the cold hallway wall, processing. Sasha thought I was broke. She thought the money came from Ethan. She had no idea who I was. It was like watching someone boast about how incredible their rental car is in front of the owner of the entire agency. Honestly, if arrogance burned calories, Sasha would be invisible, a bodiless echo. Marcus reappeared next to me a few minutes later, pulling me out of my thoughts. He held a folder in his hand, and his face was pale, his composure broken. The man who was always unflappable amid chaotic weddings and impossible conventions looked genuinely worried. You need to see this, he told me. We stepped into an even more discreet side corridor, out of sight, and in the damp silence of the service area. I opened the folder and began reading. Financial records, court documents, hurriedly printed press clippings. The further I read, the colder my body felt, as if someone had opened a window in the middle of winter. The Vances were not who they claimed to be. Their real estate empire was a house of cards built on lies and other people's money. They were 6 months, maybe less, from bankruptcy and under federal investigation. This wedding wasn't love, it was a carefully constructed escape plan. There were names of shell companies I'd never heard of, non-existent addresses, promises of impossible returns. I saw numbers, dates, lawsuits, and every line was an alarm. I headed to the parking garage to my car because I needed privacy to think. No music, no lights, no eyes on me. The overhead lights in the garage flickered as if they, too, were in shock, casting short, trembling shadows on the concrete. I sat in the driver's seat, closed the door, and the sudden silence buzzed in my ears. The documents painted a horrifying picture. Richard and Brenda weren't just in debt, they had been running something that was essentially a Ponzi scheme for years. They raised money from investors for projects that didn't exist or were inflated beyond all reality. They paid the first investors with money from the last, the classic deceit, the same old trick in a new dress. But the castle was crumbling. Investors were asking questions, auditors were circling, and the feds had already opened a case. They needed a quick exit, a lifeline shaped like a wealthy family. And that's where my brother, Ethan, came in. I understood their logic, twisted as it was. Marry into a family that looked wealthy, latch onto that reputation, and at least have somewhere to hide when everything exploded. Gain access to accounts, properties, credit lines, contacts. It could even be worse. Maybe they planned to drain my family's assets before disappearing and restarting the fraud elsewhere, with a new name, in a new city. What they didn't know was that my family had nothing. The house was mortgaged, Ethan's salary was average, and the only constant flow of money to the Millers was mine. And I could cut it off with a single call. The Van Cess were about to discover they had chosen the wrong family, and when that happened, they would abandon Ethan faster than a sinking ship. A part of me, the wounded, tired part, wanted to let it happen. Let my mother feel the weight of giving away my inheritance without a second thought. Let my brother taste what it's like to be discarded, tricked, used. Let them all savor the metallic taste of consequences. But I couldn't. As much as they had hurt me, as much as I had spent years learning to live without them, they were still my family. Ethan was still the boy who taught me to ride a bike, holding the seat from behind until he suddenly let go and yelled, "Look, Chloe, you're doing it." My mother was still the woman who stayed up when I had the chicken pox, changing my sweaty sheets and singing softly, even if she later decided I wasn't worth comparing favorably to him. Family is complicated. You can love someone and be furious at the same time, feel betrayed and still want to protect them, even if they don't deserve it. So I made a decision in that cold car with the folder open on my lap. I was going to expose the Van Cess and save my family my way. They wouldn't see it coming from me. I immediately called Renata Morales, my top legal counsel at Birchwood Group. Renata was a powerhouse, a bulldog in the courtroom, and she lived for chaos like this. I quickly briefed her on the Ponzi scheme that was unfolding, with my brother at the center of the hurricane, and asked how fast she could verify what was in the folder. Renata didn't waste time on dramatic commentary. She said she would have confirmation in less than an hour. She wanted to know if there was any immediate physical danger. I told her no, just a lot of flowers and champagne. She gave a brief laugh, cut the call, and got to work. Next, I called Tanya Chun, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on a complicated acquisition 2 years ago. Tanya was a records magician. One of those people who looks at a spreadsheet and can tell you what you ate for breakfast and how many times you chewed it. I sent her photos of the key documents, balance sheets, company names, dates, and asked her to dig deeper, cross-reference information, and look for patterns. She didn't need anything more. When I hung up, I was alone with the distant hum of the parking garage's ventilation system and the muffled echo of music from the party. Tanya called me back in 40 minutes. Maybe less, her voice tight with the excitement of someone who just found something huge. I could almost see her, glasses perched on the tip of her nose, screen glowing. "It's worse than the files show," Tanya began without preamble. "Richard Vance? His name is actually Charles Hoffman, and he's been operating under that name for 5 years since his last state fraud investigation in Nevada was dismissed on a technicality. The assets you saw? Inflated by a factor of 10. The addresses? Post office boxes in Delaware and Wyoming. Everything is a phantom. They have almost nothing liquid." "And Sasha?" I asked. Tanya hesitated for a second. I cross-referenced the names on the incorporation documents. "There's a woman named Piper Hayes listed as a principal in a failed investment company in New Mexico 3 years ago. She's listed as Richard's business partner. Business partner. The implication was clear. Sasha wasn't their daughter. This wasn't a family, it was a crew. They were a traveling roadshow of scammers, jumping from state to state, targeting families who looked like they had money to stabilize their sinking ship. The worst part came next. Tanya said that the Vances were not aiming for a bailout. They were planning a smash and grab. They intended to marry into the family, quickly access any liquid assets or co-signed loans Ethan might be talked into, and vanish right after the ceremony, leaving the Millers to deal with the inevitable federal collapse. They're desperate, Chloe. This is their last play, Tanya warned. The last piece of information Tanya gave me was the real kicker. She had managed to find one of the earlier fraud files that named Piper Hayes as the primary person of interest. She asked if I was ready. I told her yes. Don't spare me anything. And Tanya told me her real name. Piper Hayes. She also told me those parents weren't even her parents. They were partners in a long-running scam, and had been doing it for at least a decade. Different identities, different victims, the same game with new scenery. I stayed in the car with the folder on my lap and started to laugh. That humorless laugh that escapes you when the absurdity overcomes the anger. These people had more identities than a celebrity has ex-spouses. Sasha, Piper, and next year probably Danielle, Cammie, or something else that sounds like money. My phone vibrated with a message from Ethan. I stared at it for a while before opening it, as if delaying it could delay everything else. It said he needed to talk, that something about Sasha felt off, that things weren't adding up, contradictory stories, strange silences, questions she dodged. I checked the time. It was 5 minutes before 9, just when Richard was scheduled to give his grand toast welcoming the family. Too late, brother. You should have trusted that feeling an hour ago. Or years ago when you doubted everything but Mom. Still, it was better late than never. His message told me something important. Ethan was starting to wake up. Even if it was a rude awakening. I got out of the car and walked toward the hotel. The air on the 23rd floor was electric, thick with the sound of glassware and too much laughter. I found Marcus near the DJ booth. He looked relieved to see me. He said he had been observing the Vances, and that something was definitely weird. He counted that Richard had made 4 calls in the last hour, and each one left him more agitated. Brenda almost knocked over a tray when she bumped into a waiter because she was distracted. Sasha had disappeared for 15 minutes and came back with slightly red eyes. I told Marcus I needed the audio-visual system ready. At the 9 o'clock toast, we were going to give the guests a presentation they wouldn't forget. Marcus didn't blink, he just issued an understood, as if he were confirming a wine order. He asked what kind of presentation, and I handed him a USB drive I always carried in my purse, because you never know when you'll need technology to ruin someone's evening. It contained the scanned copies of the most compromising documents, along with everything Tanya had found. A hush fell over the room as Richard took the microphone. He looked exactly like a man who was about to give a triumphant speech, but felt a sudden, inexplicable shiver of dread. He cleared his throat, raised his champagne flute, and started talking about family, legacy, and a bright future. He was halfway through a sentence about the wonderful addition of Sasha to the Miller family when the music cut out abruptly. The main screens, which had been softly displaying a slideshow of Ethan and Sasha's heavily filtered photos, suddenly switched to a legal document with a heavy title. Investigation and Fraud. Richard froze. The smile stuck on his face like cheap tape. A murmur spread through the room like a wave, rising in volume, passing from table to table. Eyebrows furrowed, eyes narrowed, hands lowered champagne glasses without completing the toast. Richard fumbled with the microphone, going from red to pale in seconds, his forehead beaded with sweat. He stammered that it must be a mistake. He yelled toward the DJ booth to fix it. He said it wasn't the correct file, but the screens kept changing. Financial records appeared, showing investors money entering phantom companies. Arrows highlighted inflows and outflows of funds, with unrealistic return percentages. Then came an article about a real estate fraud that had left dozens of families without savings, with photos of half-built houses and victim testimonials. Next photos. A younger Piper Hayes, different hair color, darker, a different cut but the same eyes. Beside her, Richard and Brenda, at a charity event under other names, with smiles identical to the ones they wore that night. Sasha was pinned in the middle of the floor, her glass trembling in her hand. For the first time all night, her mask completely slipped. She looked terrified, her breathing shallow, her chin trembling. Ethan looked at the screen, then at Sasha, then back at the screen, his mind trying to fit pieces that suddenly made sense. A minute of pure, painful silence stretched as the screens continued to show the mountain of evidence, culminating in the New Mexico fraud file. The whispers died down. Marcus's voice came over the speakers, calm and professional, with a slight echo. "Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce the owner of the Monarch Hotel and CEO of the Birchwood Group. Please welcome Ms. Chloe Miller." The silence was brutal. You could have dropped a pin and heard it bounce 3 times. My mother went white, her mouth slightly open, her glass frozen midair. Ethan's jaw literally dropped, unable to close. Even Sasha, in the midst of her panic, seemed genuinely surprised, as if that detail wasn't in her script. I took the microphone from Richard's slack hand. He offered no resistance, and said, "Good evening, everyone." My voice was clear and steady, something I was grateful for. I apologized for the interruption, but said I thought they deserved to know who they were really celebrating. I pointed to the screens and explained with the calm of someone who has practiced harder speeches that Richard and Brenda Vance were not who they claimed to be, that their empire was a fraud, that their wealth was stolen from innocent investors, and that Sasha's real name was Piper Hayes, a con artist repeating the same scheme for over a decade, jumping from state to state, changing her name like one changes a dress. Sasha finally reacted. She screamed that I was lying, that I was a jealous nobody, that I was making everything up because I couldn't stand to see Ethan happy, that I had always wanted to ruin his life. I let her finish, then nodded slightly to Marcus. The ballroom doors opened, and in walked 2 FBI agents in business suits, Agent Rivas and Agent Chun, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. They moved with purpose and serious expressions, the posture of people who know exactly what they're doing. The music was silenced now. The sound of their steps on the floor was clearly audible. Sasha's face crumbled. Richard tried to run to a side exit. He managed a few steps before Agent Rivas stopped him with a firm hand on his shoulder. She told him with rehearsed calm that Richard Vance, or whatever his real name was being arrested for wire fraud, investor fraud, and conspiracy, among other charges she listed as if reading a grocery list. Brenda began to cry, mascara running down her perfectly made-up face, saying it was a misunderstanding, that they could explain it, that everything was misinterpreted, that they had good lawyers. One of the agents asked her to calm down while reading her Miranda rights. Sasha, Piper, whatever her name was, turned to Ethan one last time and begged him not to let his sister do this to them, that they loved each other, that he had to believe her because what they had was real, and everything else didn't matter. Ethan looked at her for a long time. I saw the war behind his eyes, the collapse of a sandcastle built on false promises. The woman he thought he loved versus the undeniable evidence flashing on the screens and in the agent's words. And then he did something I never expected of him. He took a step back. That simple movement was a complete earthquake. He said, his voice broken but firm, that he didn't know who she was, that he didn't know who any of them were, that he couldn't. Sasha's facade shattered. She screamed at me, calling me a horrible, jealous bitch who had ruined her life. She lunged forward, but the police officer next to her quickly restrained her. As she was being escorted away, I leaned close so only she could hear and quietly told her that the small-town girl owned the room she was standing in, paid the salaries of the people escorting her, and would sleep perfectly well knowing exactly who she was, something Sasha couldn't say. They led her away, still screaming, her designer dress wrinkled, her hairstyle ruined, her heels wobbling, and her invented life crumbling with every step, like sequins falling off a cheap costume. I turned back to the guests, who were still in shock, eyes wide, phones in their hands, unsure if it was appropriate to record, and said that the catering was already paid for, and it would be a shame to waste good food. I told them the bar would remain open for anyone who wanted to stay, that I understood if some preferred to leave, but that no one was in danger. A nervous laugh rippled through the room, releasing some of the tension. The DJ, bless him, took the initiative and put on something upbeat but discreet, as if trying to restart a collapsing heart. The engagement party was over, but the night was just beginning. The next hour felt like a fever dream. The three con artists were let out in handcuffs while people watched in silence or whispered in small groups. Sasha was still shouting empty threats when they put her into an unmarked car, promising impossible revenge. In 15 minutes, she went from future Mrs. Miller to future inmate, and that has to be a record even for a professional. Later, when the ballroom had lost some of its sparkle, and the flowers were beginning to smell slightly tired, Ethan found me near the bar. He looked exhausted, older. The golden glow had been replaced by the tired pallor of someone who had just woken up to a horrible reality. He didn't ask how or why or when. He just said he was sorry. He looked into my eyes, and for the first time, I saw him. The real Ethan, not the one our mother had groomed. I'm sorry, Chloe. For everything he repeated. He said he meant it, that he knew it wasn't enough, that it didn't erase years of treating me like a family ornament, something that was present but didn't matter. He said he never really wondered what I was doing, how I was living. He just assumed I was getting by, as always, and he leaned on that comfortable idea. I watched his face waiting for the trick, the defensive pivot, the but you also. But I didn't see a trick. I saw genuine, broken, uncomfortable regret. I told him I'm sorry was a start, not an ending. We stood there in silence for a moment. Two siblings who had spent decades as strangers, seeing each other for the first time without masks or borrowed stories. Then my mother appeared. Diana looked smaller, as if what had happened had shrunk her inside. As if her shoulders could no longer hold so much posture. She approached slowly, without her usual confidence, without her chin held high. She started to say that she didn't know, that she never imagined, that she only, but I cut her off with a gentle gesture. I didn't have the patience for a theater show tonight. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. Bank records, proof of payment, for years of payments for her mortgage, utilities, medical expenses. All from the Birchwood Group, all from me, month after month, like a metronome. I told her she believed Ethan was supporting them, and that she boasted about her generous, successful son. You were wrong, I stated simply. It was never Ethan. It was always me. She looked at the screen, then at me. Her eyes were searching, moving between the numbers on the phone and my face, trying to reconcile the invisible, unwanted daughter with the silent benefactor. It was the first time in years I saw her confusion wasn't a pretense or a look of disapproval, it was genuine. She took a deep, rarely visited breath. She whispered my name, Chloe, as if saying it for the first time, as if she had always called me daughter on autopilot without thinking about who I was. She raised her hand as if to touch me and let it fall halfway. I didn't hug her. It wasn't the time. Sometimes distance is the only honest way to be close. And then there was a commotion on the floor. My grandmother's necklace, my necklace, was on the floor where Sasha had thrown it in her fit of rage. I saw it glint between two fallen petals. A bridesmaid almost stepped on it before backing away. Ethan went. He picked it up carefully, as if a sigh could break it. He looked at it for a moment, then walked over and placed it gently in the palm of my hand. It's yours, Chloe, he said. Always was. I took the subway to work the next morning, but Ethan called me. He was standing outside the Birchwood Group office lobby, looking a little out of place in his business casual attire among the city executives. I brought him up. He spent hours in the conference room, reading the names on the area director plaques. He told me he had spent years thinking he knew me and that he was wrong about everything. That I had always been in a corner of his unfocused vision. I told him we had many years to make up for, and maybe we should start now, without grand speeches. We went to lunch, a real lunch, not a family obligation full of empty chatter and passive-aggressive comments. I chose a table by the window in the hotel restaurant, no special reservations. We talked about childhood, how we used to hide under the dining room table to listen to the adults' conversations. We talked about our parents, about the things we never told each other. I told him how lonely I felt for so many years. He listened. He didn't justify or minimize. He just listened. I also saw a young woman working in the lobby, The girl who was folding napkins. She looked nervous, timid, always looking over her shoulder. She had the kind of careful posture you develop when you're used to being shouted at and corrected. She reminded me of myself. I made a point of talking to her, asking her where she was from, what she wanted to do. I listened to her answer, shy at first, then more confident, talking about hotels like someone talking about something they love without ever having been near it. I saw myself reflected in those wide eyes, in that fear of messing up every sentence. And I felt something akin to pride, but not for myself, rather, for the possibility that another stinky small-town girl, in the eyes of someone ignorant, could find her place without having to fight the same battles alone. After breakfast, I stayed in the lobby, watching guests come and go. Executives with briefcases, tourists with hats and backpacks, families with children dragging stuffed animals across the floor. All walking on floors I bought, sleeping in beds I paid for, using elevators I authorized, without knowing who made it all possible. And it was fine. I didn't need them to know. Anonymity had become an ally, not a punishment. People always try to make you feel small because of where you come from, how you talk, how you dress, the name of your town on the map. Let them. While they're busy looking down on you, they won't see the moment you rise. I learned that lesson a long time ago in a small town where I was never enough. Listening to comparisons that scraped my soul. I carried it for years of effort, doubts, and voices telling me I wouldn't amount to anything, that I dreamed too high for my circumstances. And now here I was, standing in my hotel, surrounded by everything I built without asking permission. I touched my neck. My grandmother's necklace rested there, warm against my skin. I looked at my reflection in one of the glass walls. I no longer saw the half-erased girl, but the author of her own story. I smiled slightly, the small-town girl smelling success from miles away. And this time, no one could take it from me. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories to come.